And Ms. Roberts, what's up on the screen now is Exhibit 101. You indicated that's Ms. Reed's vehicle in the same position where Ms. McCabe left the car from the property, correct?
Yes.
Does this appear to be a still shot from the same video that you just saw in the prior exhibit?
Yes.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have Exhibit 102 now. And Ms. Roberts, what's up on the screen, that's the second photograph that I showed you just a moment ago.
Yes.
And that's essentially a closer up or zoomed in image of what's in the same still image that you saw in the prior, correct?
Yes.
And again, if you could, using the laser pointer, just direct the jury's attention to the damage that you observed on the right rear passenger tail light of Ms. Reed's vehicle that morning. Okay. Ms. Gilman, you can take it. Now you go look through the home, you don't find Mr. O'Keefe, and what happens then?
Then I said, let's go look for him. If he might be walking home, or if you thought he got hit by a plow, let's just, and Jen and Karen wanted to go back to 34 Fairview where they were at. Jen said she saw her pull up to 34 Fairview the night before. So Karen really wanted to go back there. I was the one that said, no, let's drop a car off, go to Meadows and look through the house, and then we'll start looking if he's not in the house. So that's what we did. We got in the car, and we were going to head back to Jen's sister's house.
And so this conversation, as far as the defendant, as you're testifying, really wanting to go to Fairview, when did that occur in relation to when you got to Mr. O'Keefe's?
On the way from Jen McCabe's house to John's house in the car.
So this is over the Bluetooth as you're driving?
Yes, Karen said I left him at Waterfall, and Jen said, no, I saw you pull up in front of my sister's.
And so after coming out of Mr. O'Keefe's house, do you exit the same way that you entered?
Yes.
Come out the garage door, get into your car?
Yes.
And if you could describe to the jury sort of where was everybody seated in your car when you get it?
I was driving, Karen was in the back seat, and Jen was in the passenger seat.
And as far as Ms. McCabe's sister's house, at the time, did you know where that was or who her sister was or anything like that?
I didn't even know she had a sister.
And do you know about how long a drive or how far a drive or what the route was that you took going from Meadows to her sister's house?
I think we went main roads because we were looking to see, I mean, I don't know what we were looking for, but we were looking for him. I don't know if we thought he was walking home or if he got hit by a plow. So we went main roads. We pulled out, I think we went Bolivar Street, and then Jen was giving directions because I didn't know where we were going.
And to be clear, Bolivar Street you're talking about, that's Bolivar?
Yes.
And so then Ms. McCabe is then giving you directions as you're driving, correct?
Correct.
Now, as you're driving, again, as far as what, if anything, did you see as far as plows or how were the roads treated at that time? What, if anything, did you observe in reference to that?
It was bad driving. There were plows out, but it was really bad driving.
And the visibility as you were driving from Mr. O'Keefe's house to Ms. McCabe's sister's house, how would you describe the visibility?
It was very poor. It was in the middle of a blizzard.
Now, when you get to the street, at some point you're directed by Ms. McCabe to Fairview Road, correct?
Correct.
And when you get to Fairview Road, do you recall whether or not you took a left or a right, or how did you come on to Fairview Road?
Off of Chapman Street, I took a right onto Fairview.
You took a right from Chapman onto Fairview.
Correct.
And as you're coming down Fairview Road, what, if anything, did you note or observe as far as the sort of elevation of the roadway?
You go downhill.
Do you go down a hill?
Yes.
This particular area of Canton, obviously you've lived in Canton for several years. Are you somewhat familiar with this area of Canton?
Yeah.
And how is it that you were familiar with the area of Canton prior to this date if you've never been to Ms. McCabe's sister's house?
the commuter rail is right near there that I would take to work.
Are there any schools in that area as well?
Yes, the John F. Kennedy School.
And you mentioned that your son played baseball, correct?
Yes, and
Ball field.
my son and John's nephew also went to the home daycare across the street from the JFK.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to just publish a brief portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 12.
Okay.
Gentlemen, what I'm going to ask is if you could push this video forward to 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I'm sorry, if you could play from there. I could ask him to just stop right there. Ms. Roberts, from what you've seen on the video, as far as what's depicted in this video, is that a fair and accurate portrayal or consistent with what you observed that morning as you were driving around going from Mr. O'Keefe's house to Ms. McCabe's sister's house?
Yes.
And the turn that this vehicle is taking at this point in the video, about 2 minutes and 40 seconds in, do you recognize what street that vehicle is turning onto?
I believe it's Fairview.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could. Now, Ms. Roberts, as you're driving from Mr. O'Keefe's house to this address on Fairview Road that you've never been to before, what's going on inside the car?
Karen was frantic. She wouldn't put her seatbelt on, and I was getting nervous because we're driving in a blizzard. She kept leaning in between the two seats. I think at some point she was texting in the back seat, and then she'd be leaning. She was just frantic the whole morning.
And as far as her screaming, do you recall anything specifically that she was screaming, or what, if any, sort of conversation was going on in the car as you were driving?
There was some conversation about a woman I didn't know that was Bella's mom, and she said Bella's mom never liked me. I think Bella lived near Jen's sister, maybe? I don't know. Some conversation about Bella's mom, and Karen said she didn't like me.
And do you recall where you were in your travels when that topic of conversation came up?
No, I don't recall.
Now, in reference to following that, what, if anything, did you say in regard to any other sort of women?
Any other what?
Following that conversation in regard to Bella's mom, who you didn't know, what, if anything, did you say or introduce into the conversation?
Fairview Road runs along Spring Street, I think it is, Spring Lane. So Spring Lane and Fairview are both off at Chapman Street, and there was a woman he dated that lived on Spring Lane. So when Jen was telling me where her sister's house was, I said, I don't know where Fairview is, and she said it's near Spring Lane, and I said, oh, where the dance instructor lived. John had once dated a dance instructor. And then Karen said, do you think he could have gone there? Do you think that's where he could have been? No, I was just using it as a reference point. She said it's near Spring Lane, and I knew that the dance instructor lived on Spring Lane.
And just to be clear, when you say the dance instructor, this would be for his niece, Kaylee?
Correct.
And you indicated that the two of them, being Mr. O'Keefe and the dance instructor, had dated at some point in the past, correct?
Yes.
How long ago was that?
Oh, it was when Kaylee was little. She was probably like 5.
So almost 10 years before this date that you're driving around. Now, as you're driving along and driving down Fairview, what is it that you're doing? What, if anything, do you observe Ms. McCabe doing? And then what, if anything, do you observe the defendant?
Well, we were looking for John walking or wherever he may be. So I'm driving and looking on both sides, and I think Jen was looking on both sides. And Karen she would be in the back seat, then she'd be in between us, then she'd be in the back seat, and then in between us.
And as you came down the hill on Fairview, what, if anything, what happened then?
Jen said, my sister's house is right up here. And all of a sudden, Karen said, there he is, there he is. Let me the F out of this car. And she started kicking the door
And how was she kicking the door?
with her feet. Well, how was she kicking the door?
How hard was she kicking?
Oh, pretty hard. I mean, she wanted to get out of the car, but it was locked because once you start driving, the back doors lock. So I looked over and I didn't see anything. And I looked at Jen and I said, she's crazy. And I unlocked the door and I sat back and watched. And she ran over to a mound of snow.
And so as the time you're driving down the road, had you seen anything, as you're driving down, sort of looking at the side of the road, had you seen anything on your side of the vehicle?
No.
And when you say she gets out of the vehicle, is it your side or passenger side where Ms. McCabe is that?
The driver's side.
So she gets out of the driver's side of the vehicle and the back passenger, correct?
Correct.
And how quickly does she go sort of from your car to where she ends up?
She ran over to the mound.
And at that point in time, even when she runs over, could you see what she was running over to?
At some point, I realized it was the shape of a body.
And when was that you realized? When in this sort of sequence were you able to realize that?
That was in seconds. Once she ran over to his body, I said, oh my God. And she lifted up his shirt and started to lay on him.
And when you stopped to let her out, where were you in relation to that mound of snow or what you learned?
I think my car was like in the middle of the road. I just stopped.
And in relation to where the mound of snow was, had you driven past it at that point? So where was it?
Yes.
Okay, so it was located behind your vehicle?
Yeah.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could, I would ask us to plan on that till about 6 minutes and 30 seconds. What's depicted in the screen in front of this camera angle? Do you recognize what that is?
That's my car.
And is that essentially where you parked your car when Miss Reed started kicking the doors and got out and ran over?
Yes.
If you could just press play for a moment. Pause it. Now, from this video, do you see where in relation to your vehicle, Mr. O'Keefe, where you found Mr. O'Keefe?
With the pointer?
If you could. Okay. And Ms. Gilman, if you could, again, display for about the 6.5 minutes.
Do you have drug problem? Keep the run? Huh?
spot there. The individuals on the screen again, they're just using the laser pointer and directing your attention to those arms.
That is Jen McCabe. That's Karen Reed. That's me.
Just tell me if you can play again. You can take that down. Roberts, in relation to what you just saw in the video, as far as at some point, the rear sort of tailgate or hatchback on your SUV, that was in the up position, is that correct?
Yes,
And do you recall why that was?
because I was having Jen get the baby blankets to wrap around him out of my car.
And is that something that you just sort of have in the back of your car at all times?
Yeah.
Now, at any point in time in that sequence, did you call anybody or have any sort of phone calls that you made that went to voicemail at that time?
Did I?
Yes.
I don't know.
And so nothing that you recall, is that correct?
Correct.
And did you observe Ms. McCabe make any phone calls that just sort of went to voicemail and she left her phone in your car?
Objection. Sustained.
Let me take you back, sort of when you're pulling. So as far as the conditions when you pull up and the defendant's banging on the door and gets out and runs over to Mr. O'Keefe. What's depicted in that video, obviously without your vehicle being in the middle of the roadway, is that a fair and accurate portrayal of what the road looked like and sort of what you saw upon your arrival?
Yes.
So after the defendant gets out of the vehicle, what did you do? Where did you go?
When I realized it was him or someone, I ran over and I dug his head out of the snow.
And do you recall you recognized the person in the snow was Mr. O'Keefe?
Once I dug his head out, yes.
And do you recall how his body was positioned as far as how was he on his stomach, on his back, on his side?
He was on his back.
And so you brushed some snow away from his head, is that correct?
Off his face.
And when you were brushing the snow off his face, what, if anything, did you observe about his face or the condition of him at that time?
He had blood coming out of his nose and his mouth. And his right eye it looked like a golf ball. His left eye was fine, but the right eye looked like a golf ball.
Now, you mentioned that you wiped some snow from around his head. What, if anything else, did you observe on the rest of his body?
He was bleeding in the back of the head. So when I was I don't know why I was wrapping blankets around his head, but I didn't know. He had a cut on the back of his head.
Do you recall which side of his head that cut was on?
I don't. It just was blood on the blanket that was under his head.
Now, as far as the rest of his body, did that have snow on it as well?
Say it again, I'm sorry?
The rest of his body, separate from his head area, what, if any, snow did you observe on the rest of his body?
He was completely covered.
And you know about how much snow was covering the rest of his body?
I would say like 4 inches, maybe 3. I don't really remember exactly how many, but he was covered.
And so with reference to Mr. O'Keefe and when you arrived there, 3 of you being you, the defendant, and Ms. McCabe, what is it that you were doing when you first sort of come over to Mr. O'Keefe?
Well, Karen was laying on top of him, and I told her to get off him because I was going to do CPR. And I said, Jen, you need to call 911. And I started CPR on his chest compressions, and then Karen was giving him mouth-to-mouth.
And as far as CPR goes, is that something that you had any training in prior to this?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury a little bit about that as far as what, if any, training did you have as far as CPR was concerned?
I get CPR certified every 2 years through the American Red Cross at work.
So you start doing chest compressions, is that right?
Correct.
And you direct Ms. McCabe to call 911?
Yes.
And what was the defendant doing at that?
She was doing mouth-to-mouth, and she was frantic again, running around. And
As she was running around, what, if anything else, was she doing or saying while she was running around?
did I hit him? Did I hit him? Is he dead? Is he dead?
Is that something that she said once or more than once?
More than once.
And similar to sort of the tonality or the volume of the voice that you were describing before, was that consistent when you're there sort of in front of the house?
Yes.
Now, in relation to where you were with Mr. O'Keefe, obviously you've never been in this house before, is that right?
Correct.
What, if anything, did you observe as far as overhead lights or street lights or anything like that around that area where you found Mr. O'Keefe?
There was a fire hydrant, and there was some weird, like, electrical box thing sticking out of the ground.
But you don't recall any sort of like overhead lights or anything like that?
I don't recall.
Now, this process of you sort of doing compressions and Ms. Reed is doing mouth-to-mouth and then running around, is the mouth-to-mouth that she's doing, is that sort of consistent or is it intermittent between? When is the running around in relation to the mouth-to-mouth?
I don't remember which was first. Or I was concentrating on doing chest compressions.
And so while you're doing the chest compressions, at some point do first responders start to arrive?
Correct.
And about how long was it from the time that you sort of get out of the vehicle, go over, realize it's Mr. O'Keefe, et cetera, and to when the first responders arrive?
I don't know. Wasn't long. Maybe under 10 minutes.
During that time, or during any of the amount of time that you were there, did you see anybody from any of the houses on the street come out of the house or any neighbors come out or anything like that?
No.
Once, if you recall, do you recall whether it was police or fire or ambulance or who showed up first?
I don't know. I think the police showed up first, or the EMTs. I just know the EMTs came over and said, we'll take it from here. I wasn't paying attention to what else was going on.
So you're sort of focused on the chest compressions, and at some point, some paramedic comes over and tells you they've got this.
Yes.
And so after that, where did you go?
After that, where did I go? I stayed in the area. I think I went back over to the car.
And as the paramedics are working on John, you're over by your vehicle, correct?
I think so.
And so where was, what were you doing, and where was Ms. McCabe, and where was the defendant at that point?
Karen was running around the body while the EMTs were trying to work on him. She was just frantic.
And so you're over by the car, and Ms. Reed is running around over where Mr. O'Keefe is.
Yes.
Where was Ms. McCabe?
I don't know. She was somewhere around the car.
So closer to you than to where Mr. O'Keefe was?
I don't know.
Now, where Mr. O'Keefe was, if you know, where was he in relation to the roadway or the paved sort of pathway of Fairview Road?
I don't know, because you couldn't tell which was the road and which was the grass. Like, you couldn't tell where the road began and ended. So I don't know.
Now, you described the defendant sort of running around Mr. O'Keefe frantically. What, if anything, was she saying at that point?
Is he dead? Is he dead? Is he dead?
And that sort of phraseology or the way she put that, was that consistent throughout? Is that how she stated it?
Yes.
And again, in that same sort of loud volume voice at the time?
Yes.
Now, at some point, Mr. O'Keefe is taken from where he is by the paramedics to an ambulance, correct?
Yes.
And as he's being taken off the ground, what, if anything, did you observe in that area?
His phone was under him, and it was grass.
Now, as far as the grass that you observed, how was that in relation to sort of the rest of the area where Mr. O'Keefe was?
Everything else had snow.
So everything else is covered in snow, and when he's lifted off the ground underneath his body, is that where the grass is?
Yes.
And his phone was where in relation to his body? As far as when he's lifted up, what part of his body had been opened?
Like maybe his shoulder, maybe it was like his back. So when they lifted him up, it was under where like his, whatever that, the right side of his back.
And what I'm asking is basically sort of up towards the shoulder blade or down towards his lower back, if you...
In the middle.
And when you saw the phone on the grass, what, if anything, did you do with Mr. O'Keefe's phone?
I picked it up, I put it in my pocket, and at some point, one of the first responders asked if I had it. I handed it over.
And do you recall who that first responder was?
No,
Do you recall even whether it was a police officer, a firefighter, or a paramedic, or...
no.
Now, as Mr. O'Keefe is being taken from where he was located when you found him to the ambulance, what happens then? What goes on from that?
At some point, Officer Good told Karen to calm down because she was frantic. And at some point, Jen and Karen were in the back of a police cruiser to warm up. I was standing outside watching the ambulance because I could see in through the ambulance that they were moving things and working on them.
And so what, if any, conversation did you have with the defendant or Ms. McCabe in reference to what you were seeing through the back of the ambulance?
I said, they're working on him, they're working on him. And at one point, Karen grabbed the front of my jacket and screamed in my face and said, are they working on him? Is he alive? And I said, they're working on him, they're working on him. They wouldn't be working on him if he was dead. And then she had us hold hands and pray. And then at some point, she had blood on her hands, and she told us she had her period. So I think she was just in a state of shock, maybe.
And what, if anything, did either you or Ms. McCabe say to her when she said that?
We said, no, that's not your blood. That's John's.
And what happened then?
Then the ambulance drove away.
And if you know about how long was it from the time that you were told by the paramedic to sort of step away from Mr. O'Keefe, they had this, from that point to when the ambulance drove away?
I don't know. I don't think it was long. I watched them work on whatever they were doing in the back of the ambulance, and they got in the ambulance and drove away.
And after the ambulance left, where did the three of you go, or where did you go? Where did Ms. Reed go? Where did Ms. McCabe go?
Karen, I had her in my car. Jen was going up to the door to her sister's house, and I said to the police, I had been on the phone now. I had called Mrs. O'Keefe. I had called John's mother. I had called John's father. At some point, Karen was on the phone with John's sister-in-law, Erin, telling him John's dead. So I grabbed the phone from her. I said, he's not dead. He's in the back of an ambulance. He's been in an accident. And she said that Paul was going to go, John's brother, to the hospital that they were bringing John to. So I spoke to I called Mr. O'Keefe. He didn't answer.
Next question. That'll stand, but next question.
So you call Mr. O'Keefe and Mrs. O'Keefe John's parents.
Correct.
At some point, you have a conversation with them, correct?
Correct.
And do you know why it was that Ms. McCabe was going into the house on Fairview?
Do you know why?
To wake her sister, I think.
And after those conversations, so you grab the phone from the defendant, you speak to Erin O'Keefe, correct?
Yes.
And following those conversations with members of the O'Keefe family, where is it that you were going from there?
I asked Mrs. O'Keefe if she had four-wheel drive, and she said no, and Mr. O'Keefe had a van that didn't have four-wheel drive. So I said, I'm going to come get you, and I'll take you to the hospital.
All right, so why don't we end this now for lunch? Okay?